Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. My name is Heather, and on this channel we like to walk a very fine line between a shopping addicted makeup monster and a responsible adult with a makeup hobby. Now, I really enjoy eyeshadow singles, duochromes, multichromes, blush, highlight, lip gloss, basically everything except pressed glitter. And today I wanted to talk to you about 10 palettes that changed my life. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, stick with me. We're getting into it right now. Okay, so in this particular video, I wanted to kind of talk through some of the palettes that were sort of like historical mile markers for me in my makeup journey, in my discovery and expansion into makeup. So I figured this would be kind of like fun and weird and whatever. Hopefully you like it. I'm in kind of a funky mood this week. So the first palette that I wanted to talk about was the Too Faced Chocolate Bar palette, and this, to my knowledge, is the oldest sort of not drugstore disposable kind of makeup that I own. And if you see, obviously it got some use. This shade right here is probably like the closest I'll ever come to hitting pan ever, because when I first got this palette, this was the palette I was using every single day, and I was dipping into this every single day. I think I used this shade, that shade, and then I would occasionally use like a little bit of that, a little bit of that, a little bit of that. I was so afraid of dark eyeshadows back when I was using this palette that the dark shadows in here almost never got any love from me, but this holds a lot of memories in my heart from picking this palette out and kind of like ride or dying with this palette for so long that I had to mention it in this video. And then let's see, what do I want to talk about next? I think the next one I want to talk about is Lunar Beauty Moonspell, and the sort of life lesson milestone marker that this palette has for me is to forgive brands. So when Manny originally launched his Lunar Beauty brand, I think it was shortly after his whole like Dramageddon, all the Jeffree Star nonsense and whatever. And I kind of was like, you know what? If you want to be friends with Jeffree Star, that's as much as I need to know about you. I'm out. And I had refused to buy anything from his brand, even though I thought this stuff was gorgeous, because I was just like, I don't really want to support and go down that road and whatever. And then my aunt was like, no, I'm buying this for you for your birthday. Like, this palette is amazing. You need it. And I was like, you know what? Whatever. So your money. Sure. I can't wait to try it. And so I got the palette. I actually got the wrong palette. They sent me Strawberry Moon, Strawberry Dreams instead. So we had this like whole to-do back and forth with customer service, and they were like, just keep that palette. You can get this one too. And they sent me this palette. So I ended up getting 2 palettes actually out of it, which my aunt will tell you, of course, is like so my style, because that kind of stuff happens to me all the time. But after trying the palette, after realizing that it was really good quality and that Manny puts a lot of effort into his brand, it kind of made me reconsider my sort of like permanent ban on brands, and made me sort of say, you know what, maybe I need to kind of open up my eyes a little bit more. It also was one of the palettes that I tried that really opened my eyes to more color in my eye looks. So this one definitely holds a special place in my heart, in my makeup journey, for that reason. The other palette that kind of goes along with that is the Book of Magic from Beauty Bay. And initially I had a similar sort of negative vibe about Beauty Bay, because they were also selling Made by Mitchell, which is another friend of Jeffree Star's. I don't remember if they were selling Jeffree Star directly. I think they might have briefly, but they don't anymore. But I was like, you know what, if you guys are going to do that, I don't need to purchase from you. That's fine by me. And I kind of was like, X. But then this palette came out, and it had been quite some time since they had repped anything from those 2 creators. Made by Mitchell didn't have his own brand yet, and I think Jeffree Star's stuff all got retired off of the Beauty Bay website. And I was like, you know what? I like this color story. The brand intrigues me in and of itself, and I don't necessarily have to punish an entire brand. to sort of like speak with my dollar or vote with my dollar, I can choose not to purchase from the specific sub brands that I don't approve of or don't appreciate or don't find valid, right? And then I can still use my dollars to sort of vote for things that I do like. And so this was my first purchase from them. And I have gone on to purchase many palettes from them because I do think they have really great quality. And I'm so glad that I sort of gave myself the grace and the leniency to say I don't need to punish the entire organization of Beauty Bay just to sort of voice my dissatisfaction with Jeffree Star and his friends, comrades, I don't know. But yeah, so I was so happy to try this one, and this one will always hold a special place in my heart because it opened my eyes to Beauty Bay and how awesome their brand is. The next two we'll talk about kind of together, back to back. I have not filmed in like 3 weeks. I am struggle bussing. The first is the Break the Rules palette. This was the original palette from It's Belle Cosmetics, and I believe when it came out it was originally like $27, which is an awesome price for a palette full of these squishy, beautiful shades. And the reason why I put this in here is because it was literally like a brand new launch when I stumbled across it. It was before any influencers had found this brand, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Look at these like beautiful squishy shades. I want to try that palette. I remember sitting at lunch and ordering this over my lunch break at work and just thinking like how exciting it was to try a new brand that nobody had ever tried before, a palette that I was really interested in, that I got a good amount of use out of. This palette kind of opened my eyes to that sort of like squishy duochrome multichrome formula. And because this palette came out and then subsequently so many other brands started coming out with palettes like this, it really opened my eyes to the fact that there is a lot of overlap between brands, so you don't necessarily need to buy one of everything from every single brand because inevitably you're going to end up with duplicates. So I remember this one fondly because it was my first, but definitely not my only at this point. And then we'll talk about this one. So this is my sort of recreation of the Amy Hearts Beauty Amy Loves Makeup collab, which I purchased all of the singles for and then never got because it was a super scam. I don't think Amy Loves Makeup was intending for that. I think the collab went way out of what she was expecting and did not end well. The Amy Hearts Beauty brand no longer exists, and there are many complaints alleged against her for her bad business dealings. And I did ultimately get my money back. So at the end of the day, I was made whole. I don't know if everybody else was, but the whole process of trying to order the collection and then subsequently being completely scammed by the makeup brand definitely taught me a valuable lesson about considering the overall business before I jump in to purchase from brands that I have not heard before or don't have a lot of experience with. There's no influencers that are repping it, that kind of thing. Like, you gotta kind of be a little bit cautious because you never know how big or small these brands are and how legitimate they are. So that's what this one definitely taught me. I do love my version though. My version is awesome. And we're gonna talk about two ColourPop palettes. So although this is not my first warm toned eyeshadow palette, this is the first warm tone palette that I had purchased in quite some time because after I discovered I really like cool toned eyeshadows for neutrals, I stopped really purchasing warm tones. And this palette caught my interest because I love this sort of like Italian tile and lemon, like that vibe was all for me. But the actual palette itself is beautiful, and I was able to wear this in a way that I still felt was very flattering, even though I have a cooler undertone. So for me, this sort of reminded me that I can still use warm tones, that I can still make beautiful looks from them. I just have to be a little bit more strategic about where and how much I put for each of the shades. So this one, definitely a winner. And then the Mulan palette was one of the first cool toned palettes that I picked up, and when I look at it, it's definitely like very neutral because there are some shades that I would still consider warm, like this one specifically, but a lot of the more mattes and the metallics in here I still feel have like a neutral to cool undertone. And when I would wear, like, I really would go in for this row and then the black. And that combination really does give you a very like soft, cool, smoky eye look. And for me, this palette taught me that like cool toned eyeshadows, you can wear them, they can be very beautiful, and they don't necessarily have to look like a bruise. So as long as you are careful with your placement and the depth of your shades, you can make a really beautiful cool toned look. And this opened my eyes to that, and then I just went crazy getting cool toned palettes. Like I have an entire one of those drawers, the one at the very bottom you can't see, but an entire one of those drawers that is to the brim with cool toned eyeshadow palettes. So definitely a love. This one is kind of a silly one, but I did feel like it was going to be fun to mention. And the lesson that I learned out of this, or the sort of turning point that I learned out of this palette, is that Tarte can do color. Because Tarte does not often show us that they are capable of colorful eyeshadows. And I do like their formulas. Their older formulas are not as, like, I think their newer formulas are way more dynamic than their older formulas. But the fact that they can do color is awesome, because the blues in here, the greens in here are very pretty. The other half of this palette also has some really nice, like, kind of pinky rosy shades, which are very typical for Tarte, and some warm tone neutrals, which again, very typical for Tarte. But I think it's good to remember that they are capable of color. I have since gone on to pick up some other Tarte palettes that have some amount of color in them, and so for me, this palette kind of reminded me like Tarte is still worth looking at. And I have two more palettes to talk about. The next one is the Bella Beauté Bar Strange and Unusual palette, and prior to purchasing this palette, I don't think I had ever spent more than maybe $50 or $60 on a palette. Maybe 50, because I think the original Natasha Denona MIDI palettes were $65, and then when you did the 20% off sale at like Ulta, then you got what, $13 off, so that brought it down to like $52. So I think that was about the max I had ever spent. This was $70 plus $10 of shipping. So I had never spent this much money on a palette in my entire life. And when I saw the color story, I fell in love with it, and I was like, you know what? This is insane, but I do still really want to try this palette, and I'm going to go ahead and buy it. And the lesson that this palette taught me, or the milestone that this one reminds me of, is that sometimes like spending that money to get the palette you really want is the way to go. Because I could have bought probably, 15 single shadows to sort of recreate this, but it would not have been the same. I would have probably spent even more money trying to recreate this palette. So sometimes if you feel strongly that you're gonna use the palette, that you're really interested in it, just go ahead and pick it up, and you know, you'll have to sacrifice not buying something else, but you'll at least have the palette that you wanted, even if it's super duper expensive. I would love if they came out with like a free shipping threshold, because that would make my life so much better. Because now I buy lots of things from Bella Beauté Bar, and they're all really expensive. And then the last one to talk about is Blend Bunny Cosmetics. This is the Forget Me Not palette. And the lesson that this taught me is that just because it is a brand you really like does not mean you need to buy every single thing from their collection. And I think that is very true of this palette. Blend Bunny does beautiful gradient palettes. I love all of their like rainbow palettes. Their shimmers in there are really beautiful. This palette was meant to be sort of an accompanying bridal face palette hybrid, and I think it hits the mark with what they were trying to do. I think for me personally, there's some nice contours in here. There are some great brow shades in here, some eyeliner shades, some highlighters that I can use potentially. This doesn't work as a blush. I don't know if it would work as an under eye setting powder. This can work as a highlight, that kind of thing. But for me, I didn't need to buy this. Like, I would have been okay without this. I have single contours, I have single bronzers, I have brow products that would have served me well. This was, I think, a $45 palette. It's now reduced as of today, but I think originally it was $45. So the lesson that I learned was, just because it's coming from your favorite brand doesn't necessarily mean you need to buy it. And so I keep that in mind now when I'm shopping. And with that said, these are my 10 life lesson makeup milestone palettes that I wanted to share with you. Definitely let me know in a comment, what was the first expensive palette you bought? What was that one palette that you remember being like, this is my first big girl purchase? I would love to know. If there are any other makeup milestones that you recall from your palettes, definitely let me know in a comment down below. I want to thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe before you go, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!